Sorry to keep everybody waiting. I had another issue I had to take care of. All right. Let's bring the jury back in. State recognized presence of the jury?
We do, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes, yes.
All right, welcome back. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting. We try to get all the legal stuff and all the technological stuff out of the way while you were back there so we don't have to keep bringing you in and out, and so that we can just roll through the testimony this morning. I've also made an executive decision to tell the lawyers, take your masks off when you're asking questions so that folks can hear you. All right, State, you may call your next witness.
State recall Detective Pete Catus.
No, you need to re-swear him. It's been a while. Yeah.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, sir. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
The last time you testified, Detective, it was regarding your activities up to the point of the apprehension of Mr. Loyd at Lescott Lane. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Before we discuss your investigative activities going forward from that point, yesterday afternoon, did you bring to my attention a mistake in your testimony from yesterday?
Yes, sir, I did.
Can you tell the members of the jury the mistake and why you made it and what it was?
So after my testimony yesterday, I was going over my notes, going over all the various reports that had been submitted, and I had testified yesterday that Detective Overfield had done a supplement report, referenced the projectile that had been found in the parking lot, and upon reviewing, it was determined that CSI Livengood had actually done the supplement report.
So, based upon your review, Detective Overfield did not do a supplement report, correct?
That's correct.
And it was actually done by Ms. Livengood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, going back to Lescott Lane on January 17th of 2017, at some point later in the evening, did you go out to the Lescott Lane residence?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did you assist in executing the search warrant in the residence?
I did.
And by executing a search warrant, I mean you looked around for potential evidence. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Were you present when a piece of phone was found in the toilet of one of the bedrooms?
Yes, sir, I was.
Now, which part of the phone was located?
So this was a flip phone, so it's a two-piece phone. The top screen portion, you could see visually in the toilet.
When the top screen portion was located that night was the bottom portion found?
It was not.
At some point, did you and other members of your team decide that you needed to take steps to find the bottom portion of the phone.
Yes, sir, we did.
So what steps were taken and by whom to try to find or assist with finding the remainder of the phone?
So a team from wastewater management came out to the scene, and they used a optic camera to go down the plumbing to search visually down there to see if it had made it down that far down. We didn't discover the phone at that point. I took one of their hammers and basically went to the toilet and crushed the toilet, and the little circle trap, the bottom portion of the phone, was found in there.
Sir, may I approach the witness to what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit AN and shown to counsel?
You may.
Your Honor, AN is a composite of 4 photographs. Detective, could you look at the 4 photographs in State's Exhibit AN and tell me if you recognize the image depicted in them?
Yes, sir, these are pictures of the destroyed toilet with the bottom portion of the phone in the trap.
The toilet you destroyed and the phone you found.
Yes, sir,
Did they fairly and accurately represent your actions on that day?
they do.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to admit State's AN. Thank you, sir.
Any objection? All right, this will be admitted without objection as State's Composite Exhibit 52, consisting of 4 sequentially numbered photographs.
Your Honor, permission to publish State's Exhibit 52?
Granted.
Now publishing photograph number 1. Can you tell us what we're looking at in the photograph, Detective?
So the residence has a bedroom, a main bedroom with an attached bathroom to it. This is the toilet in the attached bathroom.
Now, when the search warrant was initially executed, was the toilet on its side like that?
It was not?
Who did that?
I did.
With the hammer?
Yes, sir.
Photograph number 2 of State's Exhibit 52. What do you see in that photograph, sir?
It's the side of the toilet and the side of the trap where I hit it with the hammer, and the bottom portion of the phone.
Photograph number 3, is that a close-up of?
Yes, sir.
What is it a close-up of?
That's a close-up of the bottom portion of the phone.
And photograph number 4.
Again, close-up of the bottom portion of the phone.
The only other question I have for you, Detective, is yesterday afternoon, I believe, defense counsel asked you some questions about a warrant for Facebook materials associated with Mr. Loyd. Do you remember that question?
Yes, sir.
I believe your response was that you were aware that Facebook materials were obtained, but you were not involved in getting them.
Correct.
It's right here. I got it. Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask the court to admit State's Exhibit BF as the next numbered exhibit. It is has a business record certification. A notice was filed, and I believe there's an agreement as to authenticity.
There's Facebook.
I'm sorry?
Is that Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. Any additional objections?
No additional objections.
All right. Over the objections of the defense, this will be admitted as State's Exhibit number 53, composite exhibit consisting of how many pages, Mr.? 11 pages. Thank you.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Cross, Mr. Lenneman? All right. Thank you, Detective.
Thank you, Judge.
Is he excused and released or just excused?
Just excused.
All right. You're still subject to recall.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state recalls Karen Livengood. Karen Livengood. Here. Oh, you got it. Okay.
Ma'am, you remain under oath.
Okay.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Morning.
Ms. Livengood, when you testified yesterday, you told us, amongst other things, about your activity in collecting evidence at the scene at the Walmart on Princeton Street, correct?
That's correct.
And we saw a number of photographs that you took of particularly the parking lot at the Walmart scene. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And some of those photographs were of what you described as spent casings. You recall that?
Yes.
When may I publish State's Exhibit 31?
You may.
It's the diagram. I'll tilt it for you, Ms. Livengood, but do you generally recall the diagram?
Yes.
All right. So you can see it, Counsel. Now, you also testified, I believe, that you recovered amongst the casings 2 different calibers of casings. Is that correct? From the Walmart parking lot.
Yes.
And what were the calibers of casings that you recovered?
The 9 mils were the Winchester 9 mil Lugers, and then there was several different of the 40 caliber.
Right, so I don't need to know the manufacturer, but you collected 9mm casings and 40 caliber casings.
That's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness of what's been marked as State's Exhibits AV and AW?
You may.
Ms. Livengood, I'm going to start with State's Exhibit AV, actually. I'm going to hand you a package. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
These are going to be the 8 spent 40 caliber.
So you packaged every 40 caliber casing that you recovered from the scene in the same package?
They're in individual packages inside of this package.
Okay. And how do you know that, and how do you recognize that specific package?
Well, it has my name on it. I mean, it has the detective's name on it and the case number, and that's my handwriting.
All right. I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, just to open that up with some scissors.
Sorry.
Oh, is it already open?
Oh, I think it just ripped.
Okay.
But
And just take the scissors and open it up and make sure that what you believe to be in there is in fact in there.
yes,
Do those casings appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as they were when you packaged them, but for having been sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
yes,
I'm now going to hand you, if you could push them back in the package, State's Exhibit AW, showed you. Same thing, you see your name on the outside of the package,
yes.
and what do you recognize that package to be?
This is the 9 mils, 8 9 mils
All right,
that were from the scene.
and if you need to open it up, you have your scissors up there,
Yes,
and just look inside and make sure that it is in fact the 8 9mm shell casings.
yes,
Same question, do they appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as they were when they left your custody, other than they've been sent to FDLE?
yes,
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to admit State's Exhibits AV and AW as the next numbered exhibits. Thank
Any
you.
objections?
No objection.
All right, AV will be received as State's Exhibit number 54, and AW will be received as State's Exhibit number 55. They are composite exhibits containing multiple rounds.
So in total, then, you collected 8 9mm shell casings from the parking lot of the Walmart. Is that right?
Yes,
And 8 .40 caliber casings from the parking lot.
yes.
I don't want to gloss over this. Can you tell the members of the jury how you go about collecting the shell casings? In other words, describe how you physically pick them up and put them in the packages, please.
Once the photography is done, I wear gloves and I mark on the individual little envelope that I'm going to put each individual casing in, and then it gets sealed and my initials go on that envelope.
All right. Now, once you collected the 2 exhibits, 54 and 55, did you send them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing?
Yes.
What type of testing does FDLE do on spent cartridge casings, just generally?
I really can't, I don't know that.
Are they able to compare them to known firearms?
Yes, if they've got it, yes.
Yes, ma'am. In addition to the shell casings, did you also collect some other firearms-related evidence from the scene?
Say that again?
Sure. In addition to the shell casings, did you collect other firearms-related evidence?
Yes.
From the scene? All right. What types of evidence did you collect when I say firearms-related?
Projectiles,
All right.
pieces of.
When I approached the witness, would have been marked as State's Exhibits AS, AT, AX, AU, and State's Exhibit 34. May I approach her?
You may.
They've all been shown to counsel. I'm going to hand you each one, and then I'm going to ask you just to say and describe what it is, and then we'll go through the boring questions at the end, okay?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. First exhibit is AS. Can you tell us what that is?
This is going to be a piece of lead that was located on the ground at one of those tent markers that I have of P.
All right. Just one moment. Okay. That's as to AS. Now, I'm handing you AT. What is AT?
This one's going to be a projectile at marker cone Q that was located on the pavement.
And that's the projectile that was not initially seen, but that was then found and photographed.
Yes, yes.
Now handing you AX.
This is going to be a copper jacket that was located on the right front passenger floor, and this is going to be cone T.
And that would be the floor of the Mercury that
Yes,
we saw
yes,
the
sorry,
photographs of.
yes.
Yes, ma'am. And if I'm right, each of these, you actually wrote the description on the outside,
That's correct.
okay? And AU now, could you tell us what that exhibit is?
Copper jacket, it's going to be cone S, located on the ground, southwest of the north entrance.
And finally, State's Exhibit 34, which is already in evidence. Can you tell us if you recognize the handwriting on the outside of that?
Yes, this is my handwriting.
All right, now, did you collect that actual exhibit?
No.
What is State's 34?
It is a projectile that Detective Overfield had collected and brought to me.
All right? And did you document that in your report?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to admit, are all of these in the same or substantially same condition as they were when they left your possession after packaging them, other than they've been to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask the court to admit State's Exhibits AU, AX, AS, AT, and 34 is already in evidence.
Any objections to any of these? All right. These will be admitted without objections. AS is number 56. AT is number 57. AU is number 58. Did I skip AX? AX is 59 then. All right.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may. All right.
Again, were all of those projectiles or fragments of projectiles sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing?
All the casings I know for sure went.
Sure. Would it help you to look at the actual items to see if they went to FDLE?
Yes, better.
While we're waiting for that, I'll ask you a couple of additional questions. Leaving the Walmart for a moment, you testified yesterday that you additionally went to the Royal Oaks apartment complex to take photographs and collect evidence at the scene where the incident with Captain Carter occurred.
Yes,
Did you also collect a spent casing from that scene?
yes,
Your Honor, may I approach the witness to what's been marked as State's Exhibit AY and shown to counsel?
You may.
Ms. Livengood, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit AY. Do you recognize it?
yes.
And what do you recognize it to be?
One spent casing, and it's a 9mm Luger, and it's marked with the tent cone AC.
Okay, can you go ahead and open that up? Let's just verify that that's what's in there, please.
Yes,
Is it in the same or substantially same condition as it was when it left your custody, other than having been sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
yes,
Your Honor, at this time, we'd ask the court to admit State's Exhibit AY as the next numbered exhibit.
Any objections?
No objection.
This will be admitted without objection as State's Exhibit number 60.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness again?
You may.
And I'm specifically approaching with State's Exhibits 57, 58, 59, and 56. So if you recall, I had asked you the question about whether they had been to FDLE.
yes,
My understanding is that FDLE puts a yellow sticker on it when it goes there. Does that sound right?
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Right. State's Exhibit 57, was it sent to FDLE?
Yes,
State's Exhibit 58, was it sent to FDLE?
yes,
And Exhibit 59?
yes,
It looks like, what about 56?
yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Cross?
Judge.
You may inquire.
Good morning.
Morning,
How are you?
good.
So your responsibility is to collect stuff. Is that pretty much what you do, and take photos and document, memorialize, correct?
Collect, photograph, yes,
Okay. And so all these casings and projectiles that were found at the Walmart, those are all bagged up and sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
that's correct.
You don't compare the casing to the actual gun?
No,
Okay, that's not your responsibility.
no,
That's what they do at FDLE.
that's correct.
And so in this particular case, there were 3 guns that were collected in this investigation. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. 2 where Mr. Loyd was arrested, a Luger and a .40,
okay,
and then her gun, a 9 SIG,
that's correct.
correct? And so what happens at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is they take the gun and test fire it, and then they match casing to gun, correct?
Okay, I don't know, but yes.
Okay, okay. But that's not your responsibility.
No, sir.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. May this witness be excused.
No.
All right, ma'am, you're free to go forward today, but you remain under subpoena and subject to recall. Thank you. Call your next witness.
The state calls Richard Ruth.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, sir. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please tell us your full name and spell your last name?
Richard Ruth, R-U-T-H.
And Mr. Ruth, where are you currently employed?
I'm employed with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in Huntsville, Alabama.
And how long have you been employed by, I'm going to use ATF for short?
I've been employed with the ATF for approximately 2 years this January.
What do you do for ATF currently?
I'm a firearms examiner in the NNCTC, the NIBIN National Correlation and Training Center.
Prior to working as a firearms examiner at ATF or the ATF, did you work at a firearms examiner elsewhere?
I did. I was a crime laboratory analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE for short.
Can you describe what it was, well, before that, how long did you work as a crime laboratory analyst for FDLE?
From 2016 to 2019, and prior to that, I was a forensic technologist from 2012 to 2016.
Can you describe what you would do on a daily basis as a crime laboratory analyst in the firearms section when you worked at FDLE, please?
My primary responsibility was examining firearms to determine their functionality, as well as examining fire to ammunition components using a comparison microscope to determine whether or not those units of ammunition were fired from a particular firearm. My administrative responsibilities also involved peer reviewing my peers' case files, both technically and administratively.
Now, can you tell us about your education and then your training that is relevant to your current role in firearms and the role you had as a firearms examiner at FDLE?
I have 2 bachelor's degrees. I have a Bachelor of Science in Astronomy and a Bachelor of Arts in Physics from the University of Florida. That provided a physical science background for me to become a forensic scientist.
My training to be a firearms examiner was an 18-month training program from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that allowed me to perform those job responsibilities.
Can you give us an overview and sort of walk us through the training process, the 18 months at FDLE, please?
My training was broken into two portions. When I first started with the firearms section, it was as a forensic technologist. That was my first 6 months of training. That taught me the different types of firearms, how they function, and how to safely test fire them to determine if they are functional. When I became a crime laboratory analyst, that was an additional 12 months of training that was focused on how to use a comparison microscope. I was taught how to compare cartridge cases and projectiles to one another and to determine if they were fired from a particular firearm. I also underwent training to perform what's called distance determination. That's examining gunshot residue on objects to potentially determine a distance from which a firearm had expelled a projectile.
So after FDLE trained you, do they just send you out into the world, or do you have to pass some tests in order to be able to do your job?
My training involved both practical and written examinations prior to moving on to supervised casework. Once I successfully passed my competency tests, I had to undergo several months of supervised casework where I performed my work under the supervision of a senior crime laboratory analyst prior to results going to our customers. Once I completed my supervised casework portion, I also had to undergo a mock trial prior to performing my own casework independently.
Now, once you finish supervised work and your work is no longer supervised, is your work still reviewed?
Yes.
Can you explain to the members of the jury how your work as a firearms analyst at FDLE was still reviewed on every case that you worked?
So after I complete my examination, I have to document everything that I observed during the course of my examination on any evidence that I performed. My case file would then be submitted to a peer for what's called technical review to make sure that I followed standard operating procedures and that I did everything correctly as indicated by my notation. It would also go to another analyst after that for an administrative check where my report was reviewed against my notes to make sure that the report accurately reflected the results of my examination in my case notes. At that point, the report would then be released to our customer agencies.
When you were at FDLE, did you continue to receive education and training updates even after you did your own unsupervised casework?
I did.
Were there any studies or publications that you would review on a regular basis to make sure you stayed up to date on the technology as it advances?
So I would review what's called the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiner publication. A quarterly journal was published with peer-reviewed research. I would review those articles as they were released to stay current on developments within the firearms identification field. I would also attend conferences held by the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners, as well as discipline meetings for the firearm section that FDLE would hold for our state agencies.
And are you a member of any professional organizations that focus on firearm identification and function?
I'm a regular member of the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners.
Now, during your time as a firearms analyst at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Mr. Ruth, did you have the opportunity to provide opinion testimony in the area of firearms function and identification in the courts of Florida?
I did approximately 25 times.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask the court to allow Mr. Ruth to provide opinion testimony in the area of firearms identification and function.
You wish for it? All right. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Generally speaking, what is a firearm and how does it work?
A firearm is a device that's designed to expel a projectile through the action of an explosive. Generally, that's done by firing what's called a cartridge. A cartridge is a single unit of ammunition. It's composed of a cartridge case, a primer, gunpowder, and a projectile that's seated in the mouth of the cartridge case. The cartridge is loaded into the firearm. It's struck by a firing pin of some type, and that ignites the gunpowder within the cartridge case. That gunpowder is converted into a rapidly expanding gas, and that gas pushes the projectile down and out the barrel of the firearm.
So what portion of the firearm that you just described is commonly known as the bullet, if you wouldn't mind?
So people commonly refer to the entire cartridge as a bullet, saying, was the gun loaded with bullets? That's the entire cartridge itself. The bullet is actually just the projectile that's seated at the mouth of the cartridge case, the projectile itself.
So can you tell us how many general types of handguns exist?
They can be broken down into two categories, revolvers and semi-automatic pistols. The difference between the two is that a revolver has a cylinder with multiple chambers within it, whereas a pistol has a single chamber.
Does a revolver differ from a semi-automatic as to how the casings are removed from the firearm after the projectile is fired?
It does. A revolver, you have to open the cylinder and swing it outward, and you have to manually load a cartridge in each one of the chambers and then close the cylinder within the firearm. When the revolver is fired, the cartridge cases remain within that cylinder until you open it, and it has to be manually removed from the cylinder, each one of them by hand. With a semi-automatic pistol, the cartridges are loaded into a magazine, and when the firearm is discharged, everything happens automatically. The force of the firing process drives the slide to the rear, automatically extracting and ejecting a cartridge case. It loads the next one so that you're ready to fire the pistol again.
Now, what is it about, before I ask that question, are you able to say, even generally, where a casing will be ejected from a semi-automatic firearm?
It's really difficult to say. Generally, it's extracted and ejected out the side of the ejection port of the pistol, but FDLE didn't perform ejection pattern analysis because of how many variables are involved. If the gun's held upright, generally the cartridge case is extracted and ejected outward to the right. But after that, the cartridge case could bounce, depending on what surface it's rolling on. It's really difficult to say where a cartridge case would be after that point.
So earlier you talked about a microscope and using a microscope to compare firearms and cartridges. What is it about how a cartridge interacts with a firearm that allows you to make observations and do that comparison? If you could describe that, please.
The principle of firearms identification all relies on the manufacturing process of a firearm, as well as its continued use or abuse. When a firearm is manufactured, it undergoes many different tooling processes. This is done to finish the firearm, put rifling in the barrel to make surfaces smooth. But during that manufacturing process, it's not a perfect cut or a perfect mill. As a firearm is being manufactured, the tools undergo wear, and when it's cutting metal, it's really not a cutting, it's more a tearing process. So during the manufacture of that firearm, there are microscopic imperfections that are imparted to the firearm that remain with it. And these can change slightly over time with continued use and abuse of the firearm as the metal wears. Cartridges are a softer metal, so when ammunition is fired in something like a pistol, the harder metal of the firearm can impart those random and microscopic imperfections from the firearm into the softer metal of the cartridge, whether that's the primer, the cartridge case, or the projectile itself. It leaves a signature of sorts on the cartridge.
Are you familiar with the term individual characteristic and the term class characteristic?
Yes. Class characteristics, those are things that are determined by a manufacturer prior to the gun being produced. That could be the size of the ammunition that's going to fire, the diameter of the barrel, the number of lands and grooves that are in the rifling. Those are all things that are determined prior to manufacture. Individual characteristics, those are those random and unique microscopic imperfections that are outside the control of the manufacturer that arise from the manufacturing process that leave a unique signature for each firearm that essentially can't be controlled by the manufacturer.
So can you describe what you look at and what tools you use when you look at casings, projectiles, and firearms to compare or tell whether a firearm fired a specific projectile or ejected a specific casing?
I use a comparison microscope. It's the easiest way to define it is that it's two separate microscopes that are joined by an optical bridge in the middle. And what I do is I look through an eyepiece, kind of like a set of binoculars, where I can put one item under one microscope and another item underneath the second microscope. And in looking through the eyepieces, they appear as if they're side by side to me. And I can look at those imperfections on either a bullet or a cartridge case and see if there's any kind of agreement in those imperfections that have been imparted to the ammunition components.
So let's talk specifically about casings for a moment. What impact is performed on a casing by a firearm that allows you to tell if a casing was inside and ejected from a specific firearm?
During the firing process, that same, when the gunpowder is ignited and is converted to a gas and it pushes the projectile out of the barrel, that force actually acts in all directions and it drives the cartridge case rearward into the portion of the pistol called the slide. The manufacturing marks on the slide itself, that portion that's in contact with the head of the cartridge case, they'll be imparted into the primer and the softer metal of the cartridge case during the firing process. The cartridge case is then extracted and ejected, which also leaves another set of marks by the extractor and ejector of the pistol on that cartridge case. It's those markings that I'm looking at that can determine whether or not that cartridge case was fired from a particular gun.
So if you have a firearm that's been given to you for comparison, how do you know, or how do you generate a model, so to speak, from a firearm and a casing to compare to casings that are located elsewhere?
What I'll do with the firearm is I will generate my own standard. When a firearm is submitted to the lab, I test fire that on my own so that I can get a sample from that firearm. With the sample in hand, I can compare that using a comparison microscope to a question item, a piece of evidence that is submitted to me, to see if there's enough similarities between the evidence and that test-fired sample that I generated myself.
And last question before we move to the evidence in this case. You described the process of what marks are left on a casing. What marks are you looking for on a projectile or what's commonly known as the bullet?
On a bullet, the marks that are left on that arise from the rifling of the barrel. It's a series of lands and grooves that are in a spiral pattern. The purpose of that rifling is that as the projectile goes down the barrel, the rifling grips the bullet and it imparts a spin to it, kind of like throwing a football. The football will fly much better in flight if it has a spiral to it. So that's what the purpose of the rifling is for a bullet. But it also leaves behind those individual characteristics on the bullet, not just the lands and grooves, but what appear to be scratches under the microscope, very fine scratches down the side of the bullet. I'm comparing the marks within the rifling to one another from a test fire to a evidence bullet.
Okay, so now, do you have your case file with you?
I do.
While you were employed with FDLE back in 2017, did you come to examine some items and render some conclusions in two FDLE case numbers? The first was 2016-05-14766, and the second is 2017-05-00342.
I did.
And did you author multiple reports regarding some of the information or evidence you obtained?
I did.
So I'd like to talk to you first about your report that's dated February 2nd of 2017. Did you receive a 9mm Luger caliber Sig Sauer model P226 for testing and comparison purposes?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness for what's in evidence at State's Exhibit 28?
You may.
I just asked you, Mr. Ruth, if you received, and there are gloves on your left if you need them, I don't know that you will. If you received a Sig Sauer firearm, and you said yes, could you take a look at that box, open it up if you need to, and tell me if that's the same Sig Sauer that you received and tested?
It is.
And how do you know that it's the same firearm?
I recognize both the evidence packaging as well as the firearm by the unique FDLE case number, the exhibit number, as well as my initials that I wrote on the box, as well as the evidence within the box.
When you say you wrote your initials on the evidence in the box, what do you mean by that?
I used a paint pen and I wrote down the FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials within the magazine well of the pistol.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. Ruth, I'm going to hand you what's been placed into evidence as State's Exhibit 55, represented as 8 spent Winchester 9mm casings. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 55?
I do.
And have you done or performed some analysis on the 8 cartridge casings in State's Exhibit 55?
Yes.
Now, the firearm that you received has the word Luger in it. What does Luger in that title represent?
So a pistol such as this one, it's a 9mm Luger caliber. There's many different cartridges that have a bullet diameter of 9mm. It's a caliber family. The Luger is just the name that's applied to this specific cartridge or the type of ammunition that this pistol is designed to fire.
Now, did you compare that firearm in front of you to the 8 shell casings represented as collected from the Walmart scene in this case?
Yes.
And can you tell the members of the jury the results of your comparison and your findings, please?
After test firing this pistol and comparing the test fired cartridge cases from it to these cartridge cases here, it's my opinion that these cartridge cases were fired within this pistol.
Now, in that same report dated February 2nd of 2017, did you receive a 9mm Luger Glock Model 17 semi-automatic firearm for comparison purposes?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor, with State's Exhibit 44?
You may.
I'm going to leave that firearm with you because I'm going to ask you another question in a moment.
Okay.
Please. I'm showing you or handing you what's been marked or placed in evidence as State's Exhibit 44. Do you recognize State's 44?
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be, sir?
I recognize it to be that Glock Model 17 that was submitted to the laboratory by those same markings, the FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials on the packaging as well as on the firearm itself.
And did you compare that firearm to what was represented as a spent Hornady 9mm casing?
I did.
Now, may I approach the witness of what's been marked as State's Exhibit 60?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 60, Mr. Ruth. Do you recognize State 60?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I recognize it by my markings on the packaging, the FDLE case number, exhibit number, as well as my initials.
Could you read the description on the outside of where it's from in black marker?
It's one spent casing, Hornady 9mm Luger, cone AC, located in the parking lot northeast of left rear tire of Mercury at 4801 North Pine Hills Road.
Did you compare the casing within that exhibit to the firearm, the Glock firearm in front of you?
I did.
Could you tell the members of the jury the results of your comparison?
It's my opinion that this cartridge case was fired within this Glock pistol.
All right.
34.
I'm going to hand you now State's Exhibit 34. I'm going to take the Glock firearm and the casing. Tell me if you recognize State's Exhibit 34.
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
I recognize it to be a projectile that I examined within this case.
Did you perform any testing on that projectile?
I did.
Did you compare it to any firearms?
I compared it to the firearms within this case.
Could you read the outside of that package for that projectile?
It's one projectile collected by Detective Overfield, located by the south entrance at 3101 West Princeton Street.
Now, and if you need to open it up and look inside, that's fine, but can you describe the condition of that projectile?
The condition of this projectile is very poor. Some of it is missing. It appears to have struck an object, causing pretty severe damage to it. It's fairly distorted in appearance and also has a lot of damage to it from striking an object.
So you said that you compared that projectile to, I think you said firearms, multiple, is that right?
That's correct.
Did you compare it to that Glock 9mm firearm that you had a moment ago?
I did.
And did you compare it to a .40 caliber firearm that you received?
I did.
Finally, did you also compare it to the Sig Sauer firearm that is still in front of you?
That's correct.
Can you tell the members of the jury the results of your comparison as to that projectile, please?
The first comparison I made to that Glock firearm, my conclusion was that it could not have been fired from the Glock due to differences in the rifling characteristics. A different method was used for the rifling. This has what's called conventional rifling on the bullet. The Glock does not. It has what's called polygonal rifling. So I don't believe that this bullet was fired from the Glock. The Sig Sauer pistol that we have here, the class characteristics are similar. They both have conventional rifling. The actual width of the rifling imparted on this bullet was similar to the pistol, but due to its condition, I couldn't identify it as having been fired from this pistol or eliminate it as having been fired. This is what we call a neither nor inconclusive result. I can't say definitively if it was or was not fired from the pistol. The other pistol that I compared it to, it also had conventional rifling, but the width of the rifling was different. Therefore, I believe it was not fired from that other pistol yet.
So finally, as to the firearms, did you receive a 40 S&W caliber Smith & Wesson model SW40VE semi-automatic firearm for testing and comparison purposes?
I did.
I'm going to provide you or hand you State's Exhibit 43. If you could hand me 34, and I'm also going to take back State's Exhibit 28. What do you see, and do you recognize State's Exhibit 43?
This is the Smith & Wesson SW40VE semi-automatic pistol. I recognize it by the case number, exhibit number, as well as my initials that I placed on the outside packaging, as well as the pistol itself.
And did you also receive 8 spent casing .40 caliber represented as collected from a parking lot of West Princeton Street?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Exhibit 54.
You may.
I'm handing you State's Exhibit 54. Mr. Ruth, could you just humor me and read the outside of the package, please?
This is described as 8 spent casings, .40 caliber, various manufacturers. Marked cones A, F, J, L through O, and R, collected from parking lot at 3101 West Princeton Street.
Did you compare those shell casings to the .40 caliber firearm that is in front of you?
I did.
And what were the results of that comparison?
It's my opinion that these 8 cartridge cases were fired from this .40 Smith & Wesson caliber SW40VE semi-automatic pistol.
And lastly, sir, may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Hand you State's Exhibit 35. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 35?
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
It's a projectile that was recovered. Should I read the label on this as well?
Yes, sir, please do.
Label as the projectile recovered from right arm.
And did you compare that projectile to the .40 caliber firearm to see if it was fired by that gun?
I did.
And can you tell the members of the jury the results of your comparison or your conclusion, please?
It's my opinion that this projectile was fired from the Smith & Wesson SW40 VE pistol.
Then there are also May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm going to hand you State's Exhibit 24. And again, could you read the outside of the package?
Yes. I recognize this one as well from my initials and case number, exhibit number on the packaging. This is described as 2 projectiles collected by the medical examiner from Officer Debra Clayton.
And did you compare the projectiles in State's Exhibit 24 to the .40 caliber firearm in front of you?
I did.
And what were the results of your comparison, please?
It's my opinion that these projectiles were fired from this pistol. One of them, I believe, was a fired bullet jacket. I identified that one. I believe there was a bullet core that I couldn't do anything with, but then another fully intact projectile that was identified as having been fired from that pistol.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Cross, Mr. Livengood?
May I collect the evidence, Your Honor,
You may.
from the
yes.
witness?
Mr. Letterman, do you need it up there? He actually,
Would you like to see it, sir?
yeah.
I don't need to see the gun, I just need to ask you a question. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
All right, so an important part of your job is to obviously collect this important evidence of casings and projectiles and try to match it to a gun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes that's not possible because a projectile may be damaged, so damaged that you can't say for sure, correct?
That's correct. Damage, it can inhibit my examination. If it removes those individual characteristics, it may not be available for comparison anymore, and it's a hindrance to the examination.
But you actually have a process you work through to try to attempt to do that, to identify that to a particular gun. Isn't that right?
When I get a piece of evidence, I evaluate it for the presence of individual characteristics before moving on to the comparison procedure.
Okay. And so when we're talking about a 4 HP pedal observed in the bullet type, what does that mean?
So when I'm looking at the evidence, the very first thing that I'm doing is just noting down my observation of what the actual evidence is. In this case, noting 4 HP pedals, I'm counting how many pedals are present on what is a hollow point bullet. That's what the HP stands for.
Okay, and we're going to get back to that in 1 second. There were 3 guns that you compared in this particular case, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And in your report, you have them identified by a Q, correct? Q2, Q3, Q4?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the guns was a 9mm Luger caliber Glock Model 17. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That particular gun was the gun that was fired at, I think you had said a particular, I don't think I have it written down here. 1 second. That one was one that was fired at a scene away from Princeton, correct? It wasn't at Princeton Street.
That's correct.
Okay. And you also matched it to one casing.
The Glock was matched to one casing,
Okay.
yes.
And you obviously don't know the facts about this case in regards to who was where and when people were shot and that kind of things, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But in that particular one, there was only a casing identified to one bullet, correct?
One casing identified to one firearm.
Okay. And that firearm was that 9mm Luger that you're talking about?
The Glock Model 17?
Yeah, the Glock Model 17.
Yes, sir.
That's not the gun that Lieutenant Clayton had, correct?
No. Debra Clayton's gun, I believe, was the 6-hour P226 semi-automatic
Okay.
pistol.
So we're not confused. There's 2 9mm, but one's a Luger and one's a Luger caliber 6-hour, correct?
Correct. 1.9 Glock and 1.9 6-hour, same caliber.
And hers was the 6-hour, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you were shown exhibit number 55, which is 8 spent casings, Win 9mm Luger, located from various locations in the parking lot at 3101 West Princeton Street. I'm showing my approach, Judge?
Sure.
Those are the 8 casings that you matched to Lieutenant Clayton's gun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other casings that were collected from that scene were matched to the 40.
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, we were discussing before I jumped to the side about the process you used to identify the 6-hour to this projectile that was located on the other side of Walmart, correct?
That's the projectile we're speaking of. I'm not sure what it is in relation to the Walmart.
And that's the one you said was damaged and looks like it struck something, and that probably would have caused the damage?
Yes.
Okay. That's the one we're talking about.
Yes.
And the damage from that particular could have been caused by striking anything that's hard, correct?
Correct.
Including a wall.
Yes.
It's not unusual for bullets to ricochet off of walls.
It's not unusual. Anytime it strikes something, it's going to cause damage to the projectile.
Okay. Now, going back to your process of comparison, I think we were talking about the 4 HP pedals observed. That's one of the things that's consistent with ammunition that could have been fired out of the 6 Sauer, correct?
It could have been fired out of any pistol. A hollow point is a type of bullet loaded in any caliber cartridge.
But you directly eliminated the 2 other guns that we talked about, the 9mm Luger, which the shot was fired, the 1 shot and 1 casing at a different scene, and the .40. This particular piece of ammunition that was recovered, the projectile, did not come from either of those guns, correct?
Yes, that was based on the class characteristics of the rifling present on the projectile.
All right. Is it your testimony that the 4 hollow point petals observed are visually consistent or inconsistent with the 6 Sauer?
May I consult my notes?
Sure.
I said that they were consistent in appearance with the manufacturer Winchester, either Winchester PDX or SXT.
Okay. Which would be consistent being fired out of the 6 Sauer?
It would be consistent with that model of ammunition produced by Winchester.
Okay. And there were several little hints that while you were going through your worksheet and recording information, that I don't think lean is the right way, but indicated that this piece of ammunition could have been fired from the Q4 gun, which is the 6 Sauer.
I would say it was more that it was consistent in appearance with the cartridges that were recovered with the 6 Sauer pistol.
Okay, thank you. And the determination you made in regards to that you can't say it is, you can't say it isn't, that's based on the damage to the projectile, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you had a projectile that wasn't damaged, it'd be much easier to tell.
It may be easier. I think it's also worth mentioning that when I test fired the 6 Sauer pistol, that I evaluated the individual characteristics on the bullets that were fired by that 6 Sauer and recovered by myself. I compared those under a microscope, and those were actually very difficult. I may not have been able to identify any bullet as having been fired from that 6 Sauer. It wasn't imparting sufficient individual characteristics to the bullets that were fired by it. So no matter the condition of the bullet recovered, I may not have been able to identify that to the 6 Sauer pistol.
And why is that?
It may be because the barrel is too smooth during that manufacturing process, or the continued use or abuse. The barrel has become so worn that it's not imparting a sufficient number of scratches for me to perform a conclusive comparison on projectiles fired from that gun.
Okay. But if you had all the casings that were ejected from that gun, you would be able to identify all of those in comparison to the 6 Sauer, correct?
I was able to identify all the cartridge cases as having been fired from the 6 Sauer.
So the 8, correct?
Yes.
But if there was another one, you'd be able to identify that as well.
If it were in good condition, it's possible.
Okay. Now, I'm going to have something marked because I know you're out of town, and so we normally introduce evidence in our case in chief, and I'm just going to show you a photograph. I think you took a bunch of photographs of the various projectiles and ask you to identify it. And we're not going to show it to the jury at this point, okay? All right, I'm showing you what's been marked as I for identification defense, Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is it?
They're the projectiles that I examined under this case, under FDLE case number 2017-0500-342, specifically submission 3.
Okay, and isn't it a fair and accurate depiction of those?
Of these projectiles, yes.
All right, thank you. I have no questions, Judge.
Thank you. Redirect.
Oh, hold on one second. He said that. Yeah. Yeah, he said both guns. Well, I have nothing further, thank you.
Thank you. Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Ruth, I thought you were clear, but I'll ask you again. On direct examination, you testified that the Sig Sauer could very well have fired the projectile that was represented as found from the Walmart, the damaged projectile.
Yes.
Right. But you're certain that the projectiles represented as coming from the medical examiner, one for Debra Clayton, one for Sade Dixon, were fired by the .40 caliber firearm.
Yes.
That's all I have, Judge. Thank you.
May this witness be excused?
He is excused and released by the state of Florida. Yes.
Same, Judge.
All right, thank you, sir. You are free to go.
Thank you.
Let me see the attorneys up here for 1 second, please. Mr. Williams, call your next witness.
Your Honor, we have no more witnesses. We'd ask the court to admit States BS, a stipulation as a next numbered exhibit, and then it be read to the jurors.
Any objection? No. This will be admitted as State's Exhibit 61. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a stipulation. The Assistant State Attorney, M. Ryan Williams, and Defendant, Markeith Loyd, as well as the attorney for the defendant, Terrence Lenneman, stipulate to the following. On January 9th, 2017, Markeith Loyd had previously been convicted of a felony in the courts of this state. Further, on January 9th, 2017, Markeith Loyd had not been pardoned or had his civil rights and firearm authorization restored. Because the defense and the state have stipulated, these facts should be considered as true in your deliberations. All right, call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state of Florida rests.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the state of Florida has rested. So here's what we're going to do. There are a number of legal issues I need to address. So your lunch is here, you're going to have lunch, then you're going to get the afternoon off to relax so that I can get all these legal issues addressed. And we will be back tomorrow morning to start the defense's case. So we will work tomorrow, we will work Saturday until 1 o'clock. You will be off on Sunday, and we will resume on Monday. All right? We are on track to finish the case as scheduled. All right? I'm not going to give you an exact date, because if we miss it, then you're going to tell me, but you told us. So, I'm like, yes, sir. I told you it was no more than 2 to 3 weeks. So, all right? Thank you all. Have a good lunch. I'll see you tomorrow morning. All right. I have been informed after further investigation by the Sheriff's Department, Juror 759 is the juror who asked the question about the gun belt, and she asked it of 3 different deputies, 2 of whom refused to answer, simply said, I don't know, the 3rd of whom said 30 pounds. That's all the information I have.
We're not ignoring you, Your Honor, we're just thinking. So,
Oh, no,
thank you.
I could hear both sides sort of thinking. State.
Your Honor, we would ask the court to bring the juror in and ask the reason why she was asking the question. And this is our logic, so you can follow. If the juror is just curious about gun belt weight, that's not an issue. If she's asking because she's wondering about evidence that's been presented in the trial, we don't know that that is an issue either, but she needs to be instructed that she can't do that any further. We don't believe that that goes to any thought process that she would have about the verdict, because she's not supposed to have a thought process about the verdict at this point. So that's our suggestion as to what to do specifically, but regardless of what questions are asked, we would ask that the juror have an inquiry made of her.
Defense. Mr. Waterman. I can't hear a word you're saying. Can you stand up and turn on your mic?
We have no questions for the juror, and I mean, it's really the court's discretion, but I'm not concerned about that question.
I need to think about what I'm going to do. It's sort of an unusual situation. And I don't think it's an emergency that can't be handled tomorrow morning when she comes back, and gives me some time to do a little bit of research. And I'm very leery of getting into jurors' thought processes, but I'm inclined right now at the very least to simply bring her in and explain to her that she can only base her verdict on testimony that she has heard in the courtroom, and that no additional information or facts can be used to reach a verdict, which is just re-instructing her on the standards. But I want to think a little bit about what I'm going to do, okay? All right, folks, we're back at 1:30 for the mutiny motion. Anything else that's scheduled this afternoon?
I think we're going to discuss instructions. Was that the plan?
Well, yeah, jury instructions. We'll go over the preliminarily the jury instructions. So we're still on schedule to go to verdict on Tuesday?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Judge, when would you like to?
Can't hear you.
When would you like me to do my very short judgment of acquittal motion?
You can do it right now if you'd like.
All right, Judge. We'd renew all prior motions and objections, including the motion for a mistrial. We'd move for a judgment of acquittal in light most favorable to the state. We believe that they have not proved premeditation based on the evidence that they have presented, and we'd move for a judgment of acquittal based on that.
All right. As to the mistrial motion and all prior motions, the same rulings apply. State response to the JOA.
You know, the state's review of the elements of each of the offenses is that there is at least prima facie evidence to go to the jury on each of the elements, specifically as to premeditation. I know Your Honor is aware of the case law, that that's primarily a question of fact for the jurors to determine. We believe we've proved premeditation as to Lieutenant Clayton, if with nothing further than the Facebook posts, which are now record evidence.
All right. Court's been paying attention, keeping notes at this time as to all counts. I do find that the state has established a prima facie case sufficient to go to the jury through the testimony of the various witnesses and the video and the exhibits that have been placed into evidence. So the motion for judgment acquittal is denied at this time. Well, since we're on tomorrow's, Mr. Loyd, I need to talk to you for a moment. This is a preliminary discussion, and I'm not going to put you, I'm not going to have you affirm. We'll have this discussion again tomorrow. Mr. Loyd, you have the constitutional right to testify in this case if you wish. You also have the right to remain silent in this case. The only person who can make the decision as to whether or not you are going to testify is you. You certainly should consult your attorneys, but in the end, it's your personal decision as to whether you wish to testify or not. If you take the stand, you are waiving the right to remain silent, meaning the state can ask you any questions on cross-examination about this incident or anything that you open the door to during your testimony. Your attorneys will explain to you what opening the door means, but it basically means if you testify to things that I have ruled inadmissible, they may become admissible by opening the door. Your prior convictions, the number of them, not the details of them, are admissible felony convictions and any conviction involving dishonesty. So I will be asking you tomorrow, if it comes to the point where you're telling me we're at the point where he may or may not testify, I will be asking you more detailed questions about that. But I did want to make sure that you got the preliminary instruction from me about you testifying. All right? Anything else, folks?
No, Your Honor.
No? All right, we'll see you back at 1:30. Court's in
Thank you.
recess. Thank you.